All right. So we've been talking about, right, this new world, in quotation, new world, right? Discovered, people were already here, but however, it is a new world for Europe, right? Europe had not thought about coming this way, wasn't necessarily their interest. Their main interest was Asia. And so because of the Crusades, remember, they could not go straight from Europe to Asia because that route was now cut off according to the Crusades. So now you have to figure out, well, how do we get to the place that has all of the spices, have all of the modern technology? Because really Europe didn't have technology in that regard. Only thing that they had was what the Moors brought, the Arabs that came from North Africa that were in Spain. Now, definitely for Europe, they began to kind of climb out of what they were in, a dark age. And they were in the dark age from 711 to 1492 is when Europe kind of comes out of their shell and become a world force. So we kind of talked about that. We also talked about environment reason that the world was changing because one, it was getting warmer. The last ice age had passed, and now it gives it gives more ability for people to either come from other parts of the world into this undiscovered territory that will be new to the Europeans. And so we begin to talk about who was the first European unified nation that will exploit this. And it is the Portuguese. The Portuguese are the first ones because of they're so close to Spain and they saw what the Arabs had created and they probably heard of what was going on in Africa and they began to look on how do we get to Asia with our new route. So they began to say, well, what if we went southward and went down through or around Africa and go all the way around and get into the Indian Ocean? Maybe that's one way. And they will. And what Portugal will do early as a small unified nation, they will control the spice trade. You want to gain wealth? That's how you do it. You control the market. And that's what Portugal set out to do, and they did do that. But however, as Portuguese was going along, they began to really realize it's going to be such a long trip. We should probably set up trading posts along the way so that when the rest of Europe follows suit, which they are, because they knew that they're not going to be the only ones that are going to explore and find opportunities, new opportunities, because all young nations always try to find opportunities to expand their empire. So they knew that, so they said, you know what we'll do is we'll control the trade. And so as people are coming through, no matter what nation it is, when they stop off, we are the ones that are controlling the economics. And so their first kind of stop is in West Africa, the Songhai area, because Songhai, Mali, and Ghana were the largest African nations on the West Coast that was dealing with inner parts of Africa. So they knew that the Sub-Saharan was a great marketplace. And so the Sub-Saharan, you could get stuff from East Africa, North Africa, and you can come to this marketplace. And so they said, look, we need to control that. So that's what the Portugal will begin to do to exploit the Atlantic opportunity. I wanted to show you guys this, man, because look how small Portugal is compared to Spain or any other European nation. But it is Portugal that will set this mindset of maybe there's more stuff out there that we can gather and we can control our own economic interests and we can maintain some type of wealth. So out of Portugal, it's a guy named Prince Henry the Navigator who created a navigation school where he had the best shipbuilders and the best map makers, and they came and they began to talk about how do we explore this new world. We don't know anything about it, but how do we explore this new world? Well, he begins to set out, and a lot of explorers come out of this university, and they begin to explore into Africa. Their main concept of what they were trying to do was they were trying to continue their quest for Asian trade. Asia was the place to be. So Portugal was trying to find, how do we control this trade between Europe and Asia? And one is by having the contact with Africa. And so because of what Portugal was now looking like as a unified European nation, Spain begins to pay attention, England begins to pay attention, and France begins to pay attention. So all of these European nations are going to start sending out their explorers that will explore for their country. So for Spain, for King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they had a guy that came to them from Italy. Not from Italy, I'm sorry. An Italian from Genovia. They had a guy named Columbus. Columbus is not Spanish, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to be from the nation you are being sent from. You just have to convince whoever is going to sponsor you. So King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella finally decides to sponsor Columbus because they wanted to gain some wealth. And with that, all other European governments began to look at how can we exploit this Atlantic opportunity. Your book speaks about the French, and the French would go into, in this new world, they'll start off in Canada, and then they had a little plot of land down in Louisiana called New Orleans. And the French will kind of stay within that confines of Canada, the Mississippi, down into the New Orleans. Eventually, we will understand that Spain will have Florida, and then everything, what we consider Southwest, the Montanas, the Colorados, the Californias, the Mexico, Texas, all of that will be Spanish. And then, eventually United States will be most of the eastern seaboard from Maine on down to Georgia. And eventually England will finally begin to take over the United States, and eventually we will break from England and we will be called the United States of America. But this is how it all started. People began to look at opportunities, and they began to try to find ways to exploit. So this is Africa. Africa definitely, when you look at this map right here, right, you see where all of the trading, especially on the east coast of Africa, they definitely had close confines to what we call the Middle East, the Persian area, also up into Asia. West Africa definitely had a great connection to a lot of trade routes in Africa. So Shanghai was kind of the marketplace that a lot of African goods, you could find them in Shanghai, which is why Portuguese were interested in Shanghai, because that's kind of the market where everybody went to get trades from all parts of Africa. Another thing that most European nations are trying to do, one of the things is, I don't know if y'all remember, I don't know if your history teacher told you, they were looking for the 3 Gs. Can y'all know what the 3 Gs are? Gold. Green. Not green, but gold. Huh? Ground? No, not ground. Nope. God. So gold, God, and then if you get all of that, that gives you a glory. Thank you. So God, gold, and glory is what they were all looking for. That's all they were really looking for. God, gold, and glory. What is the God part? They wasn't looking for God. Were they looking for God? What were they doing?
They were trying to spread their religion.
Yeah, they were trying to tell everybody to convert to theirs. Because what religion are they really going against? No, it is Christianity. But what religion are they competing against? Mean to say? Huh? No, Catholic is Christian. Who controls Spain first? Muslims. So Islamic. So that's what they were doing. They were trying to expand their religion to the world because they were trying to out-expand the Muslim rule. That's what the whole thing is about. So this new transatlantic world opens up. So in the beginning, Europe was they were not interested in really coming to the New World because it wasn't really something that was set on their sights in the beginning because they didn't know what was here. They didn't even know if it really had anything useful, right? So what kings were only trying to do was expand their empire so that they can maintain their status, which is always you will have to conquer other lands and put them under you so that you are the leading factor of wherever you are. So it is the French that will begin to expand themselves into the New World, and definitely will contact themselves with the native people of this land and will begin to create some allies. And so any other European nation that will come, that's going to be important for them because they're going to need them to help them, right? Because you're in new territory, you're in new lands, you may not know how to navigate yourself in this new land, which if it wasn't for the natives, 1607 almost didn't happen, meaning they almost didn't make it a permanent settlement because of they never dealt with that type of winter before. And they almost died off, but they got help from the people who lived in that area. So what Europeans will do is they will utilize them to trade. Whatever goods or whatever plants or goods or something that was native to this land, they would trade with the natives here, and the natives would definitely get things from Europe that was native to Europe. So what it does create is what we call the Columbian Exchange. So with Columbus coming though, so 1492 is important not because Columbus discovered America, because we know he didn't discover America, but what is important is it begins to set Europeans' course to come west. And so some of the things when they came become challenges because the way that the natives thought was a little bit different than European mindset. When you come to a group of people who have a religion that is more based on a universal spiritual force, and you have a different take on religion, how will that affect the two groups? Huh? They would have to conquest?
Conflicts because of the
Oh, conflict.
Yeah.
Okay, give me an example. What do you mean when you say that conflict?
They say they view God as like Christianity and whatnot, but then the Indians view him as like some big guy in the sun or something.
Okay. So the way that they deal with their spirituality is going to be a little bit different. So when you see spirituality in different lights, it kind of causes friction between the two, right? And for the most part, if you don't believe the way that I believe, how am I going to look at anybody else? How is that going to make me feel about the person because they don't believe the same way I believe?
You're not gonna care for them. Y'all can't relate too much because y'all don't believe in the same stuff.
Yeah, but how is that going to affect one or the other?
Right.
What's going to happen between the two?
Mistrust.
Huh?
Mistrust.
Mistrust? What do you mean by mistrust?
Like, they might help me, but they're not always going to trust them. They're not going to.
Okay. All right, mistrust. All right, anything else? Huh?
And just like friction between them, I guess, as far as just like different views, backgrounds, as far as like what they represent.
Right, but even with that though, I'm trying to get us to go a little bit further. Even though with the different views, how does that affect the two groups though? Because just because you have a different view, then I mean, me and you, I can deal with the different view. But is that what's going to happen?
No. It's gonna be a lot of war.
Okay, so what are we fighting for then?
Fraud.
Huh?
For, I guess, for,
To spread your culture.
Yeah.
Fighting to spread your culture.
Okay, so but why would you have to spread your culture?
So more people could believe what you believe, so your culture doesn't.
Yeah.
All right, so if you want somebody to believe what you believe, you in your mind say that you are what to that person then? Superior.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. They're going to look at anybody that does not follow their laws, values, or whatever, you're inferior. So in order to do that, what will I have to do to the people to make sure that that is exactly what I believe?
They gonna make them like depend on them.
Okay,
I guess like, well,
so that is true. They're gonna make them depend on them, and as I make them depend on me, what kind of terms am I going to call these kind of people then? Am I going to give them good flowery names?
nah,
What am I call them?
savages.
Savages.
Yeah.
Why would I have to call them savages?
So the people who, that name sticks with them. For others, when people.
They're not refined.
Huh?
They're not refined like they are themselves to be.
So these savages need me. So when I write in my history book that I was their savior. Because they were savages. They couldn't read. They couldn't write. They were nowhere near where we were. Y'all get where I'm going? You gotta create the narrative. Because if you don't create the narrative, people would look back and say, "Oh my God, no, you were savages," because they looked at the world a little bit different. What's wrong with differences? Really, nothing, is it? But if I want to rule over you, I gotta make it mean something. So I gotta make sure, in my mind, I'm superior. And the only way I do that is I know that I got better weapons than you do, because you fight with bows and arrows. I got cannons. Your bows and arrows can kill me, but however, my cannon will do more damage over time. Which is what's going to happen, right? So the way that the Europeans view the world is very different than the natives. Because in Europe, you have to think about the environment Europe lives in. Not a lot of land mass. So in Europe, you have more people who, when they got something, they had to protect it by all means necessary. So I'll put a fence up to let you know this is my land. Don't come over my line. Right? I'm going to protect it. But then you come to a group of people who they felt like, you know, the tree is part of God, the ground is God, the animals is God. So we don't kill every animal. We don't chop down every tree. Because we only get to utilize this because God allowed us to utilize this. But you come from a country that says, by any means necessary, survival of the fittest, only the strong survives. It's a different mentality, right? So that's kind of the biggest difference between the two mentalities. And so they will look at the natives here as if they are beneath them, but the natives were doing good before they got here because they lived according to their viewpoint. But if now you have another viewpoint that's telling you that it's right or wrong, now you begin to measure on somebody else's measurement, which is why, remember when I first asked y'all in here, why y'all going to college? And y'all said to get a good job, right? But who told you that it was a good job? Somebody told you that's the measurement, right? So a lot of things that we do, a lot of things that they were doing, it's based on who's measuring. And if you can control the measure, you're the one that you can tell anybody how to do it, when to do it, and what it looks like. So that's one of the greatest things that's going to be the misunderstanding between the natives and the Europeans when it's all said and done. So I want you to watch this real quick, this video.
Monday, October 12th is Columbus Day, which we've celebrated in various parts of this country since the 18th century, even before it became a federal holiday back in 1937. And that's probably long enough, because when you find out the actual facts of what Christopher Columbus did when he got to America, you're going to see that it's one of the darkest chapters in America's history. Now, I've got a lot of these facts, Jenk, so feel free to just cut me off when you want to interject. But first of all, let's start with something light. Columbus initiated the transatlantic slave trade in early February 1494, first sending several dozen enslaved Tainos, these are the native people of the island he landed on, to Spain. Columbus described those he enslaved as well-made and of good intelligence. He ordered 1,600 of them rounded up, and had 550 of the best males and females, according to one witness, Michel de Cuneo, chained and sent as slaves to Spain. Of the rest who were left, that person writes, the announcement went around that whoever wanted them could take as many as he pleased, and this was done. And understand that significant numbers of even those early slave deliveries ended up dying en route.
Okay, so let me come in there with a couple of amazing things here. First of all, Columbus also described the natives that he ran into when he first discovered this land. If he discovered it, how come they were already there? Anyway, he said they were, quote, so full of love and without greed. And you would think like, oh, that's great, that's going to lead to good relations. He's like, no, idiots, he thought. They're so full of love without greed. It makes it super easy to enslave them, beat them, murder them, chop their hands off. Christopher Columbus, the original ISIS. We're going to get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Okay? And so he looked at their love and compassion as a weakness that he could exploit.
Mm-hmm.
This is the man we sell, right? And he says, you take the slaves and do what we want with them. Here's what they did with them according to the journals at the time. This is history, and it's not somebody else said it about them. They said it themselves,
Yeah,
right?
Most of the quotes you're going to see are taken from his personal journals.
In the journals of Columbus and his men, they bragged about having raped the native women, and that they would break their will to resist after rape, after rape, after rape. And then eventually they can get the women to do whatever they wanted because they'd raped them so much.
Yeah.
Now this is the man we sell.
Yeah.
Right? So now look, when I was a kid, I was told that Columbus discovered America. I knew that he had discovered it because there were people there. Even as a kid you could figure that out. But I got it. He discovered it from a European perspective. And at least, hey, the Europeans came here, we set up America, and we celebrated it, and I celebrated it. But when I grew up, I put childish things aside. Okay? So now you want to take a blue pill, you want to go back to thinking Christopher Columbus is a lovely guy, understand that you're making an active choice to deny facts, history, and say, I'd like to be ignorant. That's what I would like to do, right? That's a choice for me, okay? But now that I know the facts, well, obviously I changed my mind on Christopher Columbus because no one ever told me what the real facts were. You find out the real facts and you go, you would have to be a monster to want to celebrate this guy.
Yeah, they leave it out of the elementary school textbooks. But yeah, so we have more barbarity, but the fundamental facts, as you pointed out, he did not discover America. First of all, other Europeans had already been to America at that point, and as you point out, well over 100 million native people had already been living there. They had discovered it first, actually. They did not think that the world was flat at that point. They had not thought that for over 1,000 years. So he was not brave in being willing to go over the edge of the world. And he did not go in a mission of exploration at all. It was a commercial enterprise and a religious enterprise to find gold and to find slaves and to convert them where possible. Now, the initial slavery we talked about proved to be unprofitable, but he later wrote, "Let us in the name of the Holy Trinity go on sending all the slaves that can be sold." So there you get both the religious and the commercial considerations in one sentence. When the slavery did not pay off, he turned to a tribute system, forcing every Taino of 14 or older to fill a hawk's bell with gold every 3 months. If successful, they were safe for another 3 months. If not, Columbus ordered that they be punished by having their hands chopped off, or they were chased down by attack dogs. As the Spanish priest Bartolomé de las Casas wrote, this tribute system was impossible and intolerable. They not only had their hands cut off, by the way, but they were forced to wear them around their neck on thongs. A little bit barbaric there.
Okay, now imagine if ISIS had cut off hands, which they do, right? So does Saudi Arabia, by the way, one of our top allies. And then they made the kids, 15, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, wear the hands around their neck. And then they said, well, I'm only chopping it off because you didn't give me enough money, enough gold, enough bribes, right? Yeah. And then they rape the women. They do this to the kids, to all the adults. And then they sick dogs on them and rip their flesh from their body, as we all want. Now, we would rightfully call them monsters, the worst of the worst, right? Now, when Columbus does the same exact thing, we name a national holiday. Again, you didn't know. I didn't know either, right? It's okay. We're not a bad person. We were all told, hey, Columbus here was wonderful Italian, comes here, discovers America.
Explorer, brave,
all that stuff. It's okay. You didn't know. But now you know.
Yeah.
But now you know. You can't celebrate that.
Yeah. Now, there's more that they have to know, unfortunately. This is another section from Christopher Columbus's personal journal. He wrote, 100 castellanos are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand. So they had set up some sort of system of pimps and sexual slavery in the New World. Eventually, he went back to Europe and then returned with more men after saying that he could conquer all of the natives because they had so little experience with war that he needed just 50 men so that he could govern them. On his second trip to the New World, he brought cannons and attack dogs. If a native resisted slavery, he would cut off a nose or an ear. If slaves tried to escape, he had them burned alive. Other times he sent attack dogs to hunt them down, and the dogs would tear off the arms and legs of the screaming natives while they were still alive. If the Spaniards ran short of meat to feed the dogs, Arawak babies were killed for dog food. Additionally, and this is one of the sources for the information, we referenced him earlier, one of Columbus's men, Bartolomé de las Casas, was so mortified by Columbus's brutal atrocities against the native peoples that he quit working for Columbus and became a Catholic priest. In a single day, he was an eyewitness as the Spanish soldiers dismembered, beheaded, and raped 3,000 native people. Such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed in my sight as no age can parallel, he said. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature that now I tremble as I write. And the final toll for this barbarity, the slavery, the disease, the war, the killing, the torture, experts generally agree that before 1492, the population on the island of Hispaniola probably numbered above 3 million. Within 20 years of Spanish arrival, it was reduced to only 60,000. Within 50 years, not a single original native inhabitant could be found. Wow. Millions were killed as a result of the exploration and discovery. And
So, Howard's End has the same kind of account. And I'm not interested if you celebrate or whatever, but all I want you to know that when we talk about history, there are a lot of viewpoints out there that you should take in. That's the only reason why I show you this stuff. I don't show you stuff because I don't want that. It's not my job to make you feel a certain way or to make you think a certain way. But it is my job to give you more than what we have all been told. Same as me. I came through the same system. But as I began to do my own research, I began to find out the stories, a lot of the stuff were being left out. And so that's the reason why I have you guys with two different types of books. Is because I want you to be well-rounded. You know. So, what really began to happen, though, is the challenge of this mutual discovery. So this mutual discovery between the Europeans, Africans, and the Native Americans is what we call them. This mutual discovery, on one hand, can be good because each nation brought something different to the table. Plants, domesticated animals that were in some parts of the world that may not have been in other parts of the world. But the negative is the type of disease that comes from those parts of the world. Just like today, before you go to Africa, you got to get all of those shots so that whatever disease is in Africa, if you come in contact with them, you have the protection, because it can kill you, right? Just like for the longest, what was the thing that when the mosquitoes were biting from South America, has the what virus? Zika, right? If you come from another country and you got bitten by the Zika virus, you had to go into a quarantine because of the virus is not native to this country. It's not that South America is a bad place. It's just it has different, their environment is different. So because of that, you create this exchange. It creates good and bad. And the disease that was coming from Europe will wipe out the native group almost to an extinction, right? Because they never dealt with smallpox. But there were disease that they got from here that they took over to Europe, but it wasn't as devastating as smallpox was over here, but it was just as devastating though. So this mutual discovery will have its pros and cons. So the New World, Africa and America, the Columbian Exchange, in their eyes, really disrupted their lives because the native people here were living okay. They didn't need European contact to live. So it wasn't because they came in contact with Europe, it was do or die for them. They were living okay. They were dealing with the world that they lived in okay. Africa, the same. What we will see is those two groups will kind of see it more in a negative light because they will be changed forever. To the point where Africans will be the people that will be in the labor force. So when Portugal and Spain were battling for who could control the world, there was a decree by the Pope that said, we're going to draw this imaginary line, and west of the line is given to Spain, east of the line was given to Portugal. But one spot in the west, Portugal took from Spain. Do y'all know where there are more Portuguese in this area than Portugal itself? And that's not more, but just as many Portuguese are in this area than in Portugal itself. Huh? Yep, Brazil. Brazil has a large number of Portuguese because when this exploration was going on, they came to South America. That's the only place that they had a stronghold when battling with Spain. But in Brazil, they had plantations, sugar plantations, so they needed people to work. So the Africans that they came in contact with, they put them in Brazil, which is why Brazil looks the way that it looks. It's Portuguese, African, and Spanish. So the New World in Europe, the Columbian Exchange affected the life and even the societies in Europe. Europe was going through its own issues religiously because Martin Luther had tacked on the 95 Theses. And from that, it started a Protestant Reformation that other people took what Martin Luther, because Martin Luther wasn't trying to break away from the Catholic Church. He was pointing out the discrepancies of the Catholic Church. One such which was selling the indulgences. Anybody know what selling indulgences is? Anybody in here Catholic? You are Catholic. Before you go to heaven, where do you go first? What's the waiting room called? Purgatory. So the Catholic Church needed some money because they wanted to build a new cathedral and they didn't have the money. So what they did in turn is, in order to get some money, the knights would go and say, hey man, because thou shalt not kill, and that's going to put me in purgatory for a little bit longer, because knights, that's what they lived on. Knights were killers. Because they killed so that they can get certain plots of land, and they would be under the king. So they were selling them things. So the bishop would be like, I'm just using this as an example. This is not exactly what happened. Give me 100 and say 5 Hail Marys, you good. I'll lessen your time in purgatory. And so Martin Luther was like, wait a minute. Man does not have the power to free man from sin. Only God can do that. And so that's what he was talking about. But he didn't write in there, let's break away and let's create a whole new religion. He didn't write none of that. Matter of fact, when he was on trial and the peasants revolted, he told the king, man, yeah, y'all squash that. I'm not down with that. That's not what I'm down with. He turned his back on the people that believed in what he was saying. Because Martin Luther wasn't trying to cause a revolt. He was just pointing out these are the discrepancies. You cannot be a religious institution if you are doing these things. That's called corruption. But however, people take, just like anything, people take parts of a movement and use it for themselves. Most of the movements of today, when you talk about like the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ, I think it's QT or something like that. But anyway, the stuff that they're promoting, that they want their civil rights, where do you think they got most of the ideas of all of that? Yeah, the civil rights movement. Even groups who are considered a minority group, like the Hispanics, half of the stuff they're talking about, they went and looked back at the civil rights movement and said, oh yeah, we like that piece of the civil rights movement. Boom, now this is our movement. So that's what people were doing off of Martin Luther. Martin Luther had one ideal of what he was trying to do, and then someone said, oh, okay, well, let's do this. And it created friction in Europe, because Europe was now turned on its head, because for the longest, the Holy Roman Empire was the power to be. Now you're breaking that up. Well, how is this going to work? How are these religious institutions going to work? It caused religious crisis, which is why some will come this way. They will come this way because they are breaking away, because they want to practice religion the way that they want to practice. Hence the Pilgrims. They wanted to create the religion that they wanted, but they couldn't do it in England, so they fled and they came here to create that. So if you're in Massachusetts, they did everything where it was you had to be a part of the church in order to have power. So that's what's happening. Right? So, this is how this new world comes into play. A lot of things in Europe was beginning to happen a lot of things were beginning to challenge the way of thinking, the old way of thinking, which is why they call it the old world versus the new world, because the old world was coming out of whatever it was presenting to the world, and these new explorers are now going to expand, and thoughts and everything is about to change of how we know it to be. And eventually, most of the European nations were not trying to come to the New World to stay. But when England, for whatever reason, finds a way that maybe staying here might be a good thing for us, you'll begin to see them create their colonies. And from there, then it will be the colonies will begin to see the discrepancies against their mother country. And you'll see a few people who will want to break out. But not everybody was on board. Because you have to say to yourself, and they had to say to themselves, if we do this, it could lead to death. Because you are now about to fight probably the most powerful empire in the world. And if you don't do it right, it could go the other way. But however, it is those few that will have the mentality to say that, you know what, it's worth dying for, because this is what we're seeing. So that's really chapter 1 in dealing with that. Chapter 2 is a continent on the move. And so chapter 2 is going to focus more, and it's a 200-year span, close to a 300-year span. It's from 1400 to 1725. We'll begin to look at how did Spain set up their forts here in the New World. England will begin to look for this new Eden for themselves. A lot of European powers will begin to fight each other for control, and you will begin to see this new nation coming up. And all European nations will be out in full force to try to maintain status in this new world and to make their empire the biggest or the largest. All right? Couple things. Make sure I'm going to create